Good evening. Welcome to part 16 of our Middle-earth-inspired series. This is the first story in the Forgotten Realms segment. Let's begin. The forest's edge came suddenly, the dense canopy breaking apart to reveal an endless horizon of golden plains and jagged cliffs that stretched as far as the eye could see. The companions stood at the threshold, their steps hesitant as they left behind the comforting hum of the forest and stepped into the open expanse of the Forgotten Realms. The air here was drier, sharper, carrying the faint scent of earth and wildflowers, and the sky above was a vast, pale blue streaked with thin clouds that drifted lazily in the breeze. Orlen shielded his eyes against the sun, its light brighter and harsher than the soft glow of the forest, and felt the weight of the journey settle more heavily on his shoulders. Cyrana stood at his side, the keeper's staff faintly glowing in her hand, its light steady but subdued as though it too was adjusting to the new terrain. Adric knelt at the edge of the path, his fingers brushing against the dry, cracked earth as he muttered to himself, his staff resting against his shoulder. Calen lingered at the rear, his expression wary as his gaze swept over the open plains, his unease evident in the way his hand lingered near the hilt of his sword. The path ahead was faint, little more than a series of worn tracks that twisted and turned unpredictably through the golden grass that swayed in the breeze. The ruins of an ancient settlement lay scattered across the landscape, their stone walls crumbling and weathered by time, their presence a quiet reminder of the civilizations that had once thrived in this untamed land. Orlen felt the seed's absence acutely, the pocket where it had rested now empty, its pulse no longer a comforting guide. He glanced at Cyrana, her expression unreadable as she studied the horizon, and felt a flicker of unease at the thought of navigating this new and unfamiliar world. The forest felt alive, he said quietly, his voice breaking the silence. But this feels empty. Cyrana glanced at him, her grip on the keeper's staff tightening. It's not empty, she said firmly. It's just waiting. As they moved forward, the ruins grew larger, their jagged silhouettes rising against the sky like broken teeth. The air was warmer here, carrying a faint hum that Orlen could feel more than hear, a subtle vibration that seemed to echo through the ground beneath their feet. Adric paused, his staff glowing faintly as he knelt beside a fragment of stone etched with intricate carvings that had faded with time. These ruins are ancient, he said thoughtfully, his voice filled with quiet awe. Older than the forest, older than the keepers, whatever built this place, it was here long before us. Orlen knelt beside him, his fingers tracing the worn carvings as a wave of unease washed over him. The patterns were intricate and strange, their meaning lost to time, but they carried a faint sense of familiarity that he couldn't quite place. The hum grew louder as they approached the center of the ruins, the air growing cooler despite the warmth of the sun overhead. Orlen felt the hair on the back of his neck stand on end as a shadow flickered at the edge of his vision, quick and fleeting, gone before he could focus on it. "Did you see that?" he asked, his voice tense. Cyrana stopped, her gaze scanning the ruins, her grip on the keeper's staff firm. "We're not alone," she said quietly, her tone steady but sharp. Calen drew his sword, its blade catching the light as he turned toward the shadows, his movements deliberate and cautious. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low. Adric stood, his staff humming softly as he stepped back toward the group. "Something old," he said thoughtfully. "Something watching us." The shadow flickered again, darting between the crumbling walls with a speed and fluidity that made it difficult to track. Orlen's pulse quickened as he caught a brief glimpse of the figure, a lithe, sinewy form that moved with an unnatural grace, its eyes glinting like polished obsidian in the sunlight. It paused at the edge of the ruins, its head tilting slightly as though studying them, and Orlen felt a chill run through him as its gaze met his. "It's fast," Calen muttered, his grip on his sword tightening. "Too fast." Cyrana raised the keeper's staff, its light flaring brightly as she stepped forward, her expression hard. "It's not attacking," she said firmly. "It's curious." The figure moved again, circling the group at a distance, its movements quick and deliberate, its presence elusive but unmistakable. Orlen felt a strange mixture of fear and fascination as he watched it. The glint of its eyes and the fluidity of its movements unlike anything he had seen before. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. Cyrana lowered the keeper's staff, her gaze fixed on the figure. "We wait," she said firmly. "If it wanted to harm us, it would have done so already." The figure paused again, its form half hidden behind a crumbling wall, and for a moment the air grew still, the hum of the ruins fading into silence. Orlen held his breath as the figure stepped into the open, its lithe, feline form fully visible now, its sleek, fur-covered body glinting faintly in the sunlight. Its eyes, dark and piercing, were fixed on the group, its presence both alien and strangely familiar. It tilted its head again, its movements deliberate and unthreatening, and Orlen felt a wave of calm wash over him as it stepped closer, its gaze unbroken. "It's not an enemy," Adric said softly, his voice filled with quiet awe. "It's something else." The creature moved closer, its steps slow and deliberate, its sleek body gliding over the uneven ground with an elegance that made it seem weightless. Its fur shimmered faintly in the sunlight, a blend of deep grey and silver that seemed to shift like the surface of water. Orlen felt his breath catch as its dark, piercing eyes locked onto his, their gaze unblinking and unnervingly intelligent. Cyrana held her ground, the keeper's staff steady in her grip, its faint glow casting long shadows across the ruins. "It's testing me," she said quietly, her voice calm but firm, "seeing if we're a threat." Calen shifted uneasily, his sword raised but his stance hesitant, his gaze darting between the creature and the crumbling walls around them. "If it thinks we're a threat, we won't stand a chance," he muttered, his voice barely audible. The air around them grew still, the faint hum of the ruins quieting to an almost imperceptible vibration that seemed to pulse in time with the creature's movements. Adric stepped forward slowly, his staff glowing faintly as he lowered it toward the ground, his posture deliberate and non-threatening. "It's not attacking," he said softly, his tone filled with quiet wonder. "It's watching, waiting." Orlen felt the weight of the creature's gaze shift to him, its eyes narrowing slightly as though it could see into his thoughts, and he swallowed hard, the dry air catching in his throat. The creature tilted its head slightly, its movements fluid and precise, and then it stopped, its sleek form motionless except for the faint ripple of its fur in the breeze. Orlen took a tentative step forward, his hands at his sides, his heart pounding in his chest. The creature's gaze followed his every movement, its eyes unblinking, its presence both unnerving and strangely calming. "We mean no harm," Orlen said softly, his voice trembling slightly but steady. "We're just passing through." The creature's ears twitched, its head tilting the other way, and for a moment, The air seemed to vibrate with a faint, melodic hum that Orlen felt more than heard. Cyrana shifted slightly, her grip on the keeper's staff tightening as the glow of its crystal flared briefly. "It's listening," she said quietly, her voice filled with cautious curiosity. The creature stepped closer, its movements slow and deliberate, its sleek body weaving gracefully between the crumbling walls of the ruins. Orlen felt a strange calm wash over him as it approached, its dark eyes searching his face as though trying to understand him. "It's not like anything I've ever seen," Adric murmured, his voice filled with awe. "It doesn't feel natural. It's something more." The hum of the ruins grew louder, a low, resonant tone that seemed to pulse through the air, and the creature paused, its ears flicking back as though hearing something the companions couldn't. It raised its head slightly, its gaze shifting to the horizon, and let out a low, melodic sound that echoed through the ruins like the toll of a distant bell. The ground beneath their feet trembled faintly, and Orlen felt a chill run through him as the light of the glowing stones flickered and dimmed. "Something's coming," Cyrana said sharply, her grip on the keeper's staff tightening. The creature turned its gaze back to her, its expression unreadable, and then it stepped back, its movements swift and fluid as it melted into the shadows of the ruins. The air grew colder, the hum of the ruins deepening into a low, ominous tone that seemed to resonate through the ground. The shadows at the edges of the glade began to shift, coalescing into dark, writhing shapes that crept closer with each passing moment. Orlen felt his pulse quicken as the light of the glowing stones faded completely, plunging the ruins into an eerie twilight. "We need to move," Cyrana said firmly, her voice cutting through the tension. Adric nodded, his staff glowing brightly as he raised it, its runes shimmering like starlight. "The ruins are reacting to something," he said thoughtfully. "Something old, something dangerous." The companions moved together, their steps cautious but deliberate as they followed the faint path through the ruins. The creature's presence lingered at the edges of their awareness, its dark eyes watching from the shadows, its movements swift and elusive. Orlen felt its gaze on him, a quiet reassurance that was both comforting and unsettling, and he couldn't shake the feeling that it was guiding them, leading them towards something important. The hum of the ruins grew louder as they reached the center of the settlement, its low, resonant tone vibrating through the ground with an intensity that made Orlen's chest tighten. At the heart of the ruins stood a massive stone archway, its surface etched with intricate carvings that glowed faintly in the dim light. The air around it was thick with magic, a palpable presence that made the hair on the back of Orlen's neck stand on end. The creature emerged from the shadows, its sleek form gliding silently toward the archway, its movements deliberate and purposeful. It paused at the base of the arch, its gaze fixed on the companions, and let out another low, melodic sound that echoed through the ruins. The carvings on the archway flared brightly, their light flooding the glade with an intensity that made Orlen shield his eyes. When the light faded, the creature was gone, its presence replaced by a quiet, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the archway itself. Cyrana stepped forward cautiously, her grip on the keeper's staff firm as she studied the glowing carvings. "It's a gateway," she said quietly, her voice filled with awe. "But to where?" Adric knelt beside the base of the archway, his staff glowing faintly as he traced the carvings with his fingers. "The creature led us here," he said thoughtfully. "It wanted us to find this." Orlen felt a wave of uncertainty wash over him as he stepped closer to the archway, its light reflecting in his eyes. "Then we'd better figure out why," he said softly, his voice filled with quiet determination. The air around the archway seemed to pulse with energy, a low, rhythmic hum that vibrated through the ground and resonated in the companions' chests. The intricate carvings along its surface glowed faintly, their patterns shifting and flowing like liquid light, casting an eerie glow across the surrounding ruins. Orlen stepped closer, his breath catching as the carvings pulsed brighter in response to his presence, their light rippling outward like ripples on water. Cyrana stood at his side, the keeper's staff glowing steadily in her hand, its crystal reflecting the archway's ethereal glow. "This isn't just a relic," she said quietly, her voice filled with awe. "It's alive, an artifact of something far older than the forest or the keepers." Adric knelt beside the base of the archway, his staff humming softly as he studied the carvings with a mixture of fascination and caution. "The magic here feels different," he said thoughtfully. "It's raw, untamed, like the land itself." Calen lingered at the edge of the glade, his gaze darting nervously between the shifting shadows that moved at the periphery of the ruins. "We're exposed here," he muttered, his grip on his sword tightening. "Whatever brought us here, it's not done with us yet." The air grew colder, the hum of the archway deepening into a low, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through the very fabric of the ruins. Orlen felt the weight of the creature's absence, its lithe form no longer visible in the shadows, but its presence still lingered, a faint, elusive energy that seemed to guide his thoughts. "The creature wanted us to find this," he said, softly, his voice trembling slightly. "But why?" The carvings on the archway flared brightly, their light flooding the glade with an intensity that made Orlen shield his eyes. The hum deepened, rising into a melodic resonance that seemed to echo from somewhere deep within the earth, and the ground beneath their feet trembled as the air grew thick with magic. Cyrana raised the keeper's staff, its light merging with the glow of the archway as she stepped forward, her expression calm but resolute. "It's not just a gateway," she said firmly. "It's a key, something that connects this world to another." Adric's gaze sharpened, his staff glowing brightly as he stood, his expression thoughtful. "Then we need to figure out how it works," he said, "before something else does." The shadows at the edge of the glade began to stir, their movements slow and deliberate as they coalesced into dark, writhing shapes that crept closer with each passing moment. Calen's sword flashed in the faint light as he stepped forward, his stance tense but steady. "We don't have much time," he said sharply, his voice cutting through the tension. Orlen felt his pulse quicken as the carvings on the archway shifted again, their patterns resolving into a single, glowing symbol, a spiral that pulsed faintly with a light that seemed both ancient and alive. "It's asking us for something," he said, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "A memory, a truth, something it needs to open." The shadows surged suddenly, their forms stretching toward the archway like dark tendrils of smoke. Cyrana raised the keeper's staff, its crystal flaring brightly as she drove them back, her expression hard. "Whatever it wants, we need to give it now," she said firmly. Orlen stepped closer to the archway, his hand trembling as he reached out to touch the glowing symbol. The moment his fingers brushed its surface, a wave of warmth surged through him, and the world around him dissolved into a swirling haze of light and shadow. He saw the forgotten realms as they had once been, vast, thriving lands filled with towering cities and vibrant life. He saw the beings who had built them, their forms graceful and radiant, their voices resonating like music as they worked together to shape the world. and he saw the shadows that had come for them, relentless and consuming, their darkness spreading across the land like a plague. The vision shifted, and Orlen felt the weight of the artifact's purpose settle heavily on his shoulders. The archway was a bridge, a connection to the past and the future, a key to understanding the light and shadow that now shaped their journey. When the vision faded, Orlen was back in the glade, the hum of the archway steady and calm, its light glowing faintly in the dim twilight. Cyrana lowered the keeper's staff, her gaze sharp but questioning as she studied him. "What did you see?" she asked. Orlen hesitated, his thoughts still swirling with the images and emotions of the vision. "It's not just a gateway," he said softly, his voice steady but filled with quiet awe. "It's a choice, a path forward, but only if we're willing to take the risk." The shadows at the edge of the glade faded into the ground, their presence retreating as the light of the archway steadied. The path ahead shimmered faintly, the glowing stones marking the way forward with a quiet, guiding light. Adric stepped forward, his staff humming faintly as he studied the archway with a mixture of caution and wonder. "Then we take the risk," he said firmly. "The answers we need are ahead, not behind." Orlen nodded, his hand brushing against the spiral symbol one last time as the companions stepped onto the path, their resolve unspoken but clear. Together they left the glade, the light of the archway fading behind them as the vast expanse of the forgotten realms stretched out before them, its secrets waiting to be uncovered.